Hi. So, welcome to BSides Vancouver. I am very honored to be here. Today, I'm going to be talking about beautiful basics, and this term was actually told to me by um Deneen DeFiore, who's an awesome CISO here not here at United where I work. But I loved how it sounded, how it said. So I really wanted to incorporate that because it incorporates what I've been learning over my career. So let me see if I can move to the next slide. And a little bit about me. So father, husband, those are the most important things to me. The dollar sign next to the cert actually looks and affects that pretty significantly. The red team director, intel director, been doing CCDC for a number of years. So I have quite a bit of experience when it comes to all kinds of cyber related things. And one of the things that I have um, noticed over the years, this is from job to job. I've done a little bit of hopping, and you'll see in this. But I've noticed that we all talk about basics. We all talk about, hey, why aren't you doing, the simple stuff? Why? And I've seen too many talks exactly this style that is all about, have better passwords, do this, do that, and a lot of them don't tell you how to get there. A lot of them, uh, they say things that are super simple when they're not. They don't really give the background for them. So I've heard complaints like all of that is well and good, but it'll never work where I work, or um, it's not as easy as you are making it sound, or we already know all this. And to those things, I want to say that um, this is a journey through my career and my experiences, and I hope that you see that as I go through the different jobs that I've had, as I go through the different positions that I've filled. Um, Unfortunately, it's like a resume, but like I hope that you learn a little bit from it. And so here's my lesson: lessons learned the hard way. That's as a Marine. That tends to be how I learn things, as hard as possible, like the worst way possible. So, like I said, I was in the Marine Corps, participated in the MARCERT. So this is the first job that I kind of had in cybersecurity. I learned a ton, um, but one of the things that stuck out, one of the key things that stuck out every single time I had a conversation when it came to anything cybersecurity related was the same thing that I really found at the Senate and the same thing that I found at the Pentagon. And it's any government work, I think. You'll get the same thing. Well, this is legacy. If we take it down, it's not going to work. We don't have the people here anymore to do the legacy. We don't, or to manage the legacy device or whatever. Like that is one of the permeating excuses because the government had one of the first networks in the world, right? So it has all of that legacy stuff. So how do you deal with that? Well, it's by changing the conversation. Um, and I think that legacy systems do their job, they do it well, but it's because we have these outdated mindsets on them that it really stagnates, and it's like I can't move this system to a Windows 10 machine, or because it only works on XP or Windows 2000 or Windows NT. Um, and that's because the people moving it, the person or the individuals moving it, think that the only way to move this machine to a newer OS or to modernize it is to move it by figuring out how the installer works or figuring out how the pieces work, then making sure that those pieces work in Windows 10 um, or a newer version of Linux or whatever. And the the problem isn't the legacy device, it's the fact that we don't have the people thinking that this is the way they can move it. And I fall victim to this all the time, but this is one of the things that I learned really early on in my career in military and the government is that we think of things in the sense of how we learned them, and that that point in time information on how we can move things. I know plenty of people who still think that Norton Ghost is the only way to clone a machine, whereas we have like uh, virtualization software out the wazoo. Like you can get virtualization software; it comes installed on OSs everywhere, right? So like um, we have to battle the legacy issue, not at the system level, but at the mindset level, and find and teach people better ways of doing things, and staying up with those things is really hard. And so training and teaching and um, pushing people outside of their comfort zone, and Norton Ghost is a comfort zone for many. um, some of you don't even know what that is. I'm googling frantically on what that is right now, but um, uh, that's a comfort zone for people. So we need to push people to go outside their comfort zone to learn new technologies, DevSecOps, DevOps, all of this new stuff. Not Is DevOps even new anymore? Yeah. So so pushing everyone outside their boundaries and going forward and thinking of new ways to deal with the legacy stuff, because you can essentially clone a system, push it up into AWS, and it'll work for the most part, right? So you can have a Windows NT machine sitting there in AWS and essentially have it modernized by putting firewalls and all kinds of things around it. So got to figure out how to things. I don't like lift and shift, but we can get to that at another time. So then I worked at Applied Security, where I learned one of the most frustrating but awesome things. Is that the frustrating part is that at, at this small little company, so big U.S. government, small little company, um, we had it so that no one actually had admin privileges, and this was back in 2009ish. Like um, there wasn't a lot of least privilege talk out there, but back in 2009, this company had it so that no one really had admin privileges. You had to check out, just like if you wanted to check out a book from a library. Um, that was a temporary administrative privilege, and it was logged on what you were going to do with it and how you're going to use it. And it gets me every time that I work at an organization where there's 15 domain admins, or named domain admins, or named administrators for global admin, or AWS administration, or Azure administration. That Why aren't these generic accounts? Um, why don't we manage who has access to them and when they have access to them? And yeah, it could, it's difficult to set up, and admins are going to complain about it because that's not how they are used to doing things. But that's really, really important, because that permission, that even if it's automatic, Netflix actually does this, or did this at least, back in 20, I think it was 12. They posted a really good blog post about how every time someone checks out an administrative credential temporarily, it goes into a Slack channel for them, and everyone gets the update kind of thing in a single channel. And then it goes to also them, and they can approve, disapprove. It's like a side MFA thing. It was really amazing. And so more generic accounts, more logging on those usage is really where we should be going. And this beautiful basic, again, 2009, right? This is when that was happening, and so we need to move towards that. And this is not a instant overnight thing. You got to go slowly with it. But if you're not already to the point where um, you're using something like Vault. I forget who makes it. HashiCorp. If you're not using HashiCorp Vault, or something where you're vaulting the service accounts and stuff like that, that's something you should already have on your timeline, even, no matter what size company you are, right? If you have any administrative rights for anything, even if you're mom and pop, you should have a way to have a credential, even if it's in a password manager that you both share, where it's only used as a last resort. It's not an everyday use. Administrative rights should not be everyday carries, is my new say. um, so Rapid 7. This is my first consulting gig. This is when I started um, doing pen testing for lots of different companies. And one of the interesting things about pen testing a lot of different companies is that you notice how you actually get caught and how you don't. And so over time, over the year and some change that I worked there, I did a pen test a week. So that's 52 weeks worth of pen testing different companies. And I noticed a trend. Like every time that I would actually get caught by an organization, it was because a person, not security related, would say, "Hey, my Oracle box has a new user on it. Why? I'm reporting this to security." Or I got a phishing email. I'm reporting this to security. Or me as the attacker, I hit a honey token, and the honey token is essentially a fake user or a fake uh, uh, file that creates a detection when it's accessed or used. And so I was detected so many times by these system administrators, not even security people, system administrators that would do small things to get me detected. And there's a small little ad at the bottom saying "Think as canaries are awesome," and they really are. I'm not paid by them or anything, but like it's really an amazing tool. They have an open source version too. You can spin up even if you're a small mom and pop shop, which is awesome that they give back to the community like that. And so people in honey invest in your people, invest in your honey tokens. That's where your best detective measures come out of play. I've like I said, I've been detected by these honey tokens more times than multi-million dollar EDRs. So then I went from consulting all the way up to General Electric, which is giant, big, honking company. I think 1.6 some odd million users on it. And this is where I learned the really hard lesson. As a Marine, I learned that security, like, is everyone's job. Every Marine is a rifleman. That gets bundled into every single day of your life as a military member. Um, if you stand watch versus or go to war or anything, like everyone's has your back, and that's really important for those scenarios. But one of the things that I hear time and time again at every conference that I go to is that it's the users, stupid users, darn users, and it's not their job. And one of the cool things I learned at General Electric was that we can make it not their job. And as security professionals, it's on us to do that. It's on us to um, configure the things correctly so that even if they do click a link, if they download a thing, that it doesn't do anything. And while enabling their job, so incentivizing and protecting. Um, there should not be a single negative thing when someone clicks a phishing email. And what I mean by that, and I say thing because as generic as I need, um, there should not be any repercussions for them clicking on it. They shouldn't have extra training or anything like that. They also shouldn't have anything happen on their machines, click malware, whatever. So what I mean by that on this on the repercussion side is if you incentivize them, if you say, hey, um, you get 10 points every time you report a phishing email, people are going to report it more. And that, comes with some false positives, but you want people to know that and do that. It's not their job, so you pay them essentially in points, and points can come out of nowhere by making it fun for them, where they can get, if they get 2,000 points or whatever, they can get a $5 gift card from Amazon, or if they get 20,000 points, they can get a $50 gift card from Amazon. Whatever. You make it incentivized for them, and you will have people loving security at that point, right? So you incentivize it, and we need to hold ourselves accountable for doing a better job at at security in general, because we're just to be honest, like we're not doing a great job, and we need to do better. So R5 Industries is where I headed next. This is a small little startup. Unfortunately, it's no longer around, but I learned a very valuable lesson there too. Is that when I was consulting, I found that the companies that did attack surface reduction, and not really pen testing is great, um, but you don't really get the follow through with it, and those types of vulnerabilities that a pen test will show up is gonna come back again. And when you actually look at attack surface reduction, what that means is essentially you look at a single kind of category of things and you say, all right, we're gonna fix X. We're gonna fix our Azure standpoint. We're gonna fix our AWS standpoint. We're gonna fix our CI/CD pipeline. We're gonna fix our whatever. And you make it an entire project or program at your organization and say, hey, I'm gonna go fix this. It does wonders. It does more than patching. It does more than pen testing. It does more than red teaming. Just focusing down an object until it gets well secured, and then you focus down another one. And I like to think that that's one of the best things about being an internal red teamer is that you get this opportunity to do that, because it takes more than finding a ton of vulnerabilities in a line to actually do anything. It takes more than um, like one-time interactions or five-time interactions with a single point of contact. It takes collaboration. It takes programs. It takes projects to get and solve problems. And so when you do an attack surface reduction program, you work with all of the people who build those things that you're attacking and reducing the risk, the actual risk to them. And so if you have an internal red team, you should have them be doing attack surface reduction projects and tell them, hey, our CI/CD pipeline is what we want to focus on next, and tell them go tear it apart, go figure it out. Not tear it apart. You don't want any outages, but still, like find all of these problems with them. Excuse me. All right, then, unfortunately, like I said, that resulted in that company not resulted in. That's a bad way of saying it. That company unfortunately didn't quite make it. So I went on and had the awesome opportunity to work at IBM's X-Force Red when they were just starting to kind of stand that back up. And the lesson I learned here, this was consulting yet again, and I noticed that one of the things that I would do is I would somehow grab credentials, because this was about the time when phishing using exploits wasn't really working anymore. The Java jar and Java applets didn't work anymore. And so credential grabbing was starting to become a thing. And I noticed that when I'd grab credentials, I could fly, drive, whatever up to the place where they had the corporate offices. Especially, well, I mean, this wasn't during COVID, but like especially during COVID when no one's around, you can sit out in a driveway, in a parking lot, next to a building, whatever, and access wireless super easy. And nobody's talking about this. I know that the Hack5 Pineapple does a bunch of enterprise stuff. I know that SensePost has an amazing track record of, I think they're a new company now, not SensePost anymore, but they have an amazing track record of doing all kinds of amazing attacks on enterprise level things. But I don't think it's talked about enough that if I grab a set of credentials or a certificate from a company, I can then access them permanently, and no one notices, and no one can track, and it's very hard for people to track down wireless connections. And I could go months with my own machine that isn't monitored at all on a system. So what I'm asking here is, hey, on those Radius servers, on those Aruba servers, turn on MFA, turn on the ability to do a push notification to a system, so that when you connect, you have to say go ahead and connect. Because if I steal a credential, I'm not going to have their phone. I'm not going to have wherever their MFA is going. So then I can't connect. Make it so that I can't just use a single factor, a certificate, or a username and password. Some companies have both, where it's a certificate, username, and password, and those are not really that's not really multi-factor. Because I have a certificate, that means I had access to your corporate network once, and that's it. I don't have to have it for a very long time because all I have to do is request a cert or have a cert or have exploited a single system with a cert. And I'll just be honest, very little times where those usernames and passwords match up with the certificate, or are checked between the two. Um, and you can just connect. And during my consulting time, I noticed that, oh my gosh, I don't even know how many times, but I would just drive over, and the customer or point of contact would be like, "Why on earth are you at my office?" Or how did you do that? Because you have access to all of the things. And I fished them once. I didn't use their VPN. I didn't use all of the other things that do have MFA these days. And if you don't use MFA on VPN, please do. But that's enough for another story. Um, but I know that MFA on Wi-Fi isn't talked about that much, but it is an option, and finding that option isn't easy. Just from experience on a lot of different companies that I've worked with trying to turn this on, but it can be turned on, and it's not a super difficult thing, because all you do is at the beginning of the day have your users push the button on MFA, and then they're connected for the rest of the day, which is fine. But that's the minimum that should be that should be wireless these days. All right, Uber. So after consulting, I noticed, and this will be a trend you'll see, is I am not a fan of consulting, but it seems to draw me back every single time. Um, at Uber, I was an internal red teamer, slash incident responder, and my first week, I think there, I noticed something that was pretty mind-boggling. And so when I first started using Chrome, I noticed that they were doing these rolling automatic updates essentially, in the background, and Firefox does the same thing now. IE does it, or Edge does the same thing now. And but I noticed something even more amazing at Uber, is that the mindset that Chrome has on rolling updates, where you're constantly getting these updates, um, has I don't know if it's an intended effect, but it's certainly effective on something. And what I mean by that is that vulnerabilities or exploits, if you're building an exploit for Chrome, you have to have a very specific version in mind. You have to have, and that worked for IE too. When for Internet Explorer, you targeted IE6, IE7, not individual small little things in between, but big version numbers is what you could target. And now with Chrome, because it updates all the time, because it does all this all the time, you are no longer able to say, I can exploit Chrome 99 all across the board. Not easily, like in rare cases, but it's such a rarity these days, um, that it dawned on me on previous jobs that, the reason why vulnerabilities aren't as well seen in browsers anymore is because of these rolling updates. And when I started working at Uber, I noticed that they were doing the same for servers, which boggled my mind. And so I dug into it, learned that, they would have individual server groups go down, do the patches, all of the patches, while these other servers were load balanced and could handle the load. And they would spin up and down, like, and grow and shrink, using AWS and Azure and all the other GCP and stuff like that automatically. but um, but they were doing the same for servers, and um, that had the same effect that Chrome did when they first started doing security updates. Is that these systems were no longer auto, or they no longer stayed online forever. And that offline, that downtime actually increased security by a lot. And it also made me as an attacker, when I was doing red team stuff for them, I couldn't stay on a server for very long because it would stay alive for maybe an hour or a day. And I could do what I could, but like as soon as that server went offline, got wiped and loaded. And this is where DevOps and uh, infrastructure as code and that kind of stuff comes in. Is that uh, I couldn't stay on these systems for very long, and that was very new to me. I love persistence, and and figuring all that out was very tough. Um, and so, as an attacker, it was really hard to stay on any of the services that Uber had because they were always changing and they were microservices all over the place, and they were getting destroyed all the time. So how can you work this into a corporation? How can you work this into a bigger product? Well, load balancing, resiliency. You build servers where it's not just a single monolithic giant server that does everything. You use microservices, you use Docker containers, and blow them away, um, and then have them be rebuilt all the time. And that way you stay ahead of patches. That way you stay ahead of all kinds of things. But obviously, you have to patch your core images, and then we're getting back to all of the the problems we had with Norton Ghost is where that image would get out of date, and then you'd deploy it to a server, and it'd take 5 years to patch because your base image was out of date. So you update your base image, auto goes to the latest. That's one of the coolest things about Docker is that if you're pulling from latest, it will automatically do that and pull and go up. So, um, if you can change your mindset of any server that you currently have, be it ESXi, be it Active Directory, even, and we'll talk about that in a second, but any identity provider, any other thing where you can have persistent data with a non-persistent service, you will go miles ahead of things, and that applies to everything. That really does. You see everything going to Kubernetes or Docker, and that's because it can, and it's not as hard as you think. Um, and moving things that way and getting them to and with that mindset in place, you will deal with security. IT will deal with security without even thinking about it. All right. This is probably one of the hardest to consume beautiful basic lesson that I had, but it was amazing. And so telling people about this, getting them to embrace it is really hard because people like their laptops, and they use them for all kinds of things. But uh, when I worked at Uber, there was a system that would continue to be infected with random malware, and every time it was because people were plugging in USB sticks, and it wasn't that they were plugging in USB sticks that was the problem, and that's what everyone talks about is, hey, you shouldn't allow USB sticks, but we need to change that thinking and make it so that they can still put it on a USB stick and it doesn't do anything bad. And this is what the whole talk's about, right? Is finding ways to make it so that the bad thing doesn't happen and the good thing still does. And so we deployed a Chromebook to that system, to that location, and instantly overnight, no more vulnerability, no more malware infections because the malware on those USB sticks was Windows focused or Mac focused, right? And so if it's a Chromebook, it doesn't have a platform for that necessarily. There are Chrome book vulnerabilities, but not as much. And as I said, Chrome changes all the time. So, um, but if you expand that, if you take it to and say, hey, does my HR person really honestly um, need a full Windows machine if they're using Office 365 or Google Sheets and Gusto and all of these other products that are out there that are all web based? If you have a person in mind that doesn't use anything but web based platforms, and that's where everything's going these days, then do they really need a Windows machine? Do they really need a Mac? And the answer is probably no, but tearing it out of their hands is going to be tough. And so what you need to do to get this to work is, and I found this to work, is you start with, beta testers, people who will get an additional Chromebook, but not get their main machine refreshed on them. So they get the new Chromebook, they start to like it because it's portable and easy to use or whatever. And are a lot more portable than a standard laptop. And it's a lot faster because there's no OS to deal with, there's no EDR to deal with, that kind of thing. And they start to like it and they start to use it more. And then when you do the refresh and they have to turn in their old laptop, it's been sitting in a corner for 6 months. And so, to get this to work, you don't force it down anyone's throat. And none of these lessons you force down anyone's throat. It's a process to get there and project to get there. And that's why I think that internal red teams are really good, because they can help these projects along and talk about risk to them. And so when you do something like this, it's really hard for ransomware or malware to get in touch with them. And then by making it so individuals or smaller groups don't have these types of OSs anymore, it makes the attack surface in your whole organization go lower. And that does amazing things. And it makes it really hard for me as an attacker to laterally move, to go anywhere else. If I get on your one Windows machine, you know now where to focus all your efforts when it comes to EDR. If I get on your one Windows server that you haven't been able to migrate into smaller clustered services or deployment services or rotating services, then you know where to focus, right? So the more that you can reduce that attack surface, the better. And to do that, start by giving Chromebooks or other similarly OS minimalist systems. I hope this is all making sense, because I can't see any feedback or anything. And so when I moved on from Uber, I worked at Cruise Automation, and one of the things that I always knew that firewalls good, right? Everyone knows firewalls good. But one of the cool things I learned at Uber, but more firmly at Cruise, was that even their servers that weren't in AWS, even their servers that weren't in uh, Azure or GCP or containers, they had their firewalls fully turned on, and that was and it was just Windows firewalls or IP tables. They were turned on in deny mode, and unless they specifically allowed that port, it wasn't going anywhere. And so what that did was, me as an attacker, and I worked as a red teamer at Cruise, was I couldn't find Windows, SMB everywhere. I had to really work at it. Like, I could only talk to the domain controller. I had to really work at finding those different parts. So when every server only has, certain ports allowed, maybe to everyone, but just to ranges, because we had good, network ranges, then I would have to get to another server. I'd have to find a vulnerability in one of the servers in that same range to be able to talk to the server I wanted to talk to. And that really goes back to one of the previous lessons, where if you reduce the attack surface, if you reduce that, if you push an attacker into a corner, I have to make more hops as an attacker to get somewhere. And yes, I might still get there. No network is perfect, but the more hops I have to do, the easier it is for that detection to happen. And so with this one, though, firewalls, one of the great things about AWS is that it starts with firewall deny any on everything, allowed in, and you have to specifically allow things in. And I love that mindset with a deny any as default, because you have to do a little work to get it going, but once it's going, you're good. And that works really well. but we need to start doing it on internal servers. And I mean, if you have Windows servers in your network right now, turn them all on the firewall. They're going to have all the exclusions in there already, but you need to go in and remove those exclusions. And it's a one by one, yes, or it might be group policy to set those, but it's a lot of work. It's tedious work, but it's amazing. Like it's super effective. And if I if I saw any corporations do the network or firewalling on like the built-in firewall on each system, you would be so close to zero trust with this. Like that is the key to zero trust is when you can get every system in your network to have their host-based firewall turned on, not just on like in the workstation phase. And this is what I'm going to talk about here is like Windows firewall in domain mode isn't a firewall. Um, Everything that you can imagine needing as an attacker is allowed on the domain mode. And so what you need to do is put it into public mode. Even if it's connected to the domain, every single workstation should be always in public mode. And what I mean by that is that um, at this current point in time, no one needs to RDP to a workstation. Like servers, yeah, sure. But workstations, no. You should have some kind of remote administration on everything, like an EDR. Almost every EDR I've ever looked at has remote administration of some sort, one form or fashion. Every single IT support staff thing has a way to access a machine because it has an agent on the machine. I mean, every system on a modern corporate network at any level has at least 2 to 3 or 15 agents on it that you can figure out a way to remotely administer. There should be zero reasons why anything should be coming in to a workstation on a corporate network. And that's what public mode does. And if you turn on public mode for every network, that does an amazing thing also for when they go home, when they're remotely working, when they are anywhere at a coffee shop or whatever. So it was that mode was designed for coffee shops and hotel Wi-Fi, but it does just as good at home. It does just as good in the corporate office. It even does more because if a system in a corporate office is owned, then they can get to the workstations, and that's where all the users are logged in. Me as an attacker, I want to get to where all the users are logged in so I can get more credentials so I can go more places. So unfortunately, Cruise did a big layoff, and I was part of that. And then I was welcomed with wide arms into Black Hills Information Security. The family there is amazing. They are an awesome group of people. I was so happy to work with them. And what I learned there through consulting is that there were a couple of companies that were on the move or already. There was one company that was already there, but very close to dropping Active Directory completely. Now, Active Directory is this monolith, and we're getting away from that. As an industry, we're getting away from these monolithic servers that do everything for us. We're getting into microservices. We're getting into the small bits that we can actually control way better. And because Active Directory is so giant, so massive, no one can ever think of we're gonna get rid of Active Directory in 5 years, because that undertaking just seems like an impossibility. Like, no way, not possible. And I'm here to tell you it is. It's a slow process. And you start with moving users off of Active Directory or groups off of Active Directory. And this is actually in a previous company that I saw where all of the groups for all of permissioning and stuff like that, they were still pointed at Active Directory at the time, but they were all managed through another software. And I think it was built in-house, but still, all of the group membership, everything, where me as a manager or me as a director, I had, the ability to add, remove people from my groups very easily through this interface, and I have a whole list of them all at once. Whereas with Active Directory, I'd have to know all of the groups I own and then find a way to look at each one. it's just too complex to be good for corporations these days. And so how you deal with this is by moving it slowly. You take one group, move it off. You take another group, move it off. You get an IDP that syncs up with Active Directory, and you slowly move everything to look at that IDP, and eventually Active Directory is no longer needed other than for LDAP, and then you cut the LDAP tie. It's a slow process. Um, I'm not going to say it's not, but it's not impossible. And the great thing about, so how do I manage my systems then? How do I do SCCM? How do I push things to my systems? And that's all through MDM. Windows 11, Windows 10, they all support mobile device management. I don't even think it's called mobile device management anymore, but MDM. Managing OS X, managing Macs are way easier through MDM. Managing corporate phones, all of that, it's so much easier through MDM, and it has a very specific purpose versus the Active Directory. We can do everything, and I hate to say it, but like that's kind of what we need to be doing. And it might take 5 years, it might take 2 years, it might take 10 years, but we need to get rid of all of the monolithic servers that do everything for a corporation and start moving to a place where we can rapidly change and do that quickly. So United Airlines is where I work currently. And one of the lessons, not necessarily like I'm still learning lessons here, but like this is not one specifically that I learned here, but multiple different companies on the way back. But one that most security people are not going to want to hear is that if you don't know if your tools are functioning, they aren't. I want to know just in comments on Twitter or otherwise, how many systems you actually have checking into your EDR, and does that fluctuate on a day-to-day? How do you know which ones? Is there any alerting that one isn't checking in anymore or hasn't for a while? Is there any way that you know that those systems are actually working? And one of the questions that scares every single Splunk engineer on the planet is, would you know if logs stop coming in from one server? I guarantee the answer is no. This is what we need to start doing with our security tools, right? Originally, one of the beautiful basics that I talked about or talk about frequently is MFA on security tools, which is thankfully not a thing anymore. Well, it is a thing, and that's why I don't talk about it, because almost every security tool that I talked to originally used to have default credentials, and way worse than the other things that we were scanning, like what was it? One of the vulnerability management tools, they had a default username and password. And so I could just log in to that default username and password on a couple systems that I was doing these assessments for, and then I know where the vulnerabilities are. So I'd find MSO 67. Oh, it's on that system. Okay, done. And we didn't really secure our tools. Now we're getting way better at securing our tools as security professionals and security engineers, but we're not doing a very good job at logging them. So if the Splunk or Sumo server goes down, how do you, you'll know that the Sumo server is down, but if the services are up, but the things that are feeding it are no longer up, you don't really know. And that's one of the harder things that we're getting to, is finding when those happen. And there was an organization I worked at previously where we had I think an EDR on, I think it was something like 10,000 servers, 10,000 systems. And there was a patch that came through that the update on these EDR systems, they patched all of them, and 5,000 of them were no longer checking in because the patch didn't work. 5,000 of them out of 10,000, and no one knew, because there was no system in that system to say this is how, or how many are checking in, or this is, we saw a large deficit in people or number of check-ins. Nothing is correlating that data with firewall logs or seeing if those systems are actually online but no longer checking into EDR. Uh, and 5,000 systems were blind. And we just happened as a pen test team to come in and hit those specific systems without knowing that they didn't work, because it was a 50-50 chance at that point. And we hit those systems, and we were actually doing a purple team, and we're like, "Hey, do you see this? Hey, do you see this? Hey," they're like, "No, we don't," which is really weird. And pipeline monitoring, and what I mean by pipeline is the pipeline of endpoint to logging to detection to whatever else automation that you have, all of that pipeline. We do a pretty crap job at monitoring, making sure those work. And so really need to get to a point where we're doing those things, and we will. And how to do that is involving IT. IT are really good at doing their job at monitoring things going up and down. They really are. That is one of their main focuses when it comes to server administration is uptime, and they have tons of tools to do that, a myriad of tools to do that. Involve them. Say, hey, I need to integrate my EDR with this monitoring tool to make sure that if this system is offline via these 7 checks, or is online via these 7 checks, but offline because of an EDR is not saying it, say something. Because then you instantly know when an attacker is, or even a malicious insider is trying to be more invisible. All right. And I think we're getting close to my time, but if not, I'm already done, so I can answer a bunch of questions if there are any. Thank you so much for having me out. I hope that this keynote at least learned something out of it. But if not, I apologize. You can always hit me up on Twitter. I have my direct messages open there. If you want to talk to me here in the comments too, I'm open to that. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening to me, and I appreciate BSides Vancouver for having me out. All right, let's see if there's any questions in here. My org has 0 AD. That's awesome. How easy are Chromebooks to centrally manage from a config and update perspective? Super easy. They just like any Android device, they connect to MDM very easily. So if you already have an MDM for phones, these would just check into that, and it's super easy. Thanks for the question, Tyler. Yeah, Docker latest is awesome. Norton Ghost takes me back. Yep, some people actually remember it. So Bruce says responsibility equals if you see something, say something. I agree with that especially when it comes to safety. And safety is security sometimes, or many times. But I think it stops there, and we as security professionals try to make it more through security awareness training, through other things. But we try and push the fact that it's more of their fault for not patching, for not learning of the security awareness stuff, for not whatever, and we push too much on them. From Jack, have you seen any really good solutions for confirming that logs are arriving in a SIM properly? Yeah. So it's more the arriving in the SIM properly. That's an engineering thing initially when you first get it. It's more the outages that are the problem. And when a system is offline or a service is offline, to push those logs, that's when it's not that they're not arriving correctly, it's that they're arriving at all. And so stuff like Datadog, Monit, there's a bunch of different secure IT monitoring systems that can create checks to see if services are online, if data is flowing, all kinds of network configuration stuff that can work really well to do that. And we just have to apply it to our security tools, just like the servers and IT apply it to their applications and services. Can you go without AD if you're going down Azure path? Absolutely. You'll have Azure AD possibly for their identity provider, but they also, pretty sure they also have an additional identity provider. I could be wrong there, but I think they have another path if you're not doing the AD route. But AAD or Azure AD is decent. And you don't have to use all of the features of AD. And there's a lot of protections that come with Azure AD with the automation, rotation, and all of that when it being a cloud platform. When it comes to log monitoring, do you look at it at a transport layer or do you look at it at a landing zone? Both seem ideal, but what's the biggest impact? I look at it more on, not on, like I said, not on the landing zone, not on the transport layer, but more on the system that would be providing those services. So, so if I have server A and server A is going to Splunk, for instance, I'm monitoring the service on. So I'll have like a Splunk group, and then inside that group, I'll be monitoring Splunk itself. But I also have a plugin or a piece going to server A that says this service on server A, like FileBeat, whatever, WinLogBeat. I want to make sure that it is always online, and if it goes offline, there's a red dot in our Splunk server, and that way it can monitor in both of those. All right. I think that's everything that I saw. Thanks again for your time. Appreciate it. Have a nice day. I don't know how to log out of here.
Thanks a lot, Rob. There was a couple other questions here that popped up in the
Sure.
chat that we didn't get to. If you have the time,
Yeah.
one of the questions here was, do you have any recommendations for Wi-Fi MFA? They're using Okta ID as their IDP, but they seem to be only compatible with Cisco.
So that's an interesting question. A little deeper than, okay. So they have Okta, they have Cisco. Cisco does have features and capabilities to turn on MFA on their Radius services, but it's non-standard. And so you got to get their engineering team involved in enabling that on your systems. And if you have older systems, it's not going to be there, unfortunately. So it's a newer thing that's starting to roll out on the Cisco side. Aruba, I think, has it does definitely have it already. A few other wireless APs and services already have it, but I don't think Cisco has it as a default yet, or as an available option by default yet.
And just one last one here is, are there any recommended ways to configure command-based privilege escalation on Windows systems with a non-login account, similar to sudoers on Linux?
This has nothing to do with my talk, but
just picking
yes,
your brain.
There's absolutely. If you want to send me a direct message, I will answer that. There's tons of ways to do it. A great blog to go look at, though, is Hexacorn's after the run key or past the run key. I'm forgetting the name of it. But Hexacorn's blog series, he has like 170 things on persistence on Windows that totally work on different levels. So that's the path I would send you.
All right, thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it. And thanks for kicking off BSides Vancouver.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
Take care.